This is David Finzer broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia. You can join our conversation by calling toll-free in the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-655-2121 or by Skype at ORN Live, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Now, according to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,775,039,000,000 and counting, which amounts to a debt per taxpayer of $138,676. While the gross domestic product lags behind at $15,201,049,000,000. The total U.S. debt, when you combine everything together, is $56,904,968,000,000, or $181,394 per citizen. Since it's Monday, of course, we have our economic, financial, and sometimes cultural kibitzer and correspondent, Michael Gard, who's the CFO of Capital Conservator, with me. Hello, Mike. Welcome to the show.
Hi, David. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Serbia, 25 degrees Celsius. That's 86 Fahrenheit for you at home. It's beautiful, sunny, and warm. It's great.
Actually, it's a little too hot for me.
It was just great walking outside. Very, very relaxing.
Well, the humidity is only 60%, so that helps.
Well, it's not like the South, is it?
No. Here they start complaining that it's extremely humid at 60%. Debt clock.
Yeah, that's high, huh?
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I was going to mention about Spain. I don't know if you talked about it in the first hour.
No, I didn't.
Obviously, over the weekend, the big financial news in the world, really the thing that everybody was waiting to find out was how the EU was going to handle, the Eurozone was going to handle the Spain problem. As you know, Portugal and Ireland and Greece have all received various bailouts of different sorts and sizes, and Spain's banks were on the verge of collapse, and the Eurozone finance ministers have come through with 125 pledged billion dollars or euros to support the Spanish banks, and they think that that's going to be enough to keep them out of the woods for a while. So, and it probably will, but it's very similar to the United States problem. You know, really, I think to put it into terms that people can understand and relate to, if you had a job where you were making $3,000 a month, let's say, but you were spending $5,000 a month, and that's pretty much what Spain's doing. They're collecting revenues, but then they're spending more than they're making. The same thing the United States is doing now. And over a course of a couple of years, you accumulated a debt. Your credit card bills had piled up to more than your annual salary. Let's say, if you were making $3,000 a year, your annual salary is $36,000. Let's say you owed $40,000 on your credit card bills. And I came to you, David, and I said, you've got $40,000 on your credit card bills. I've got a checkbook here. How much do you need? Are you going to tell me you need $40,000? Because that will surely set you straight. That'll get you out of debt with your creditors, right? But that's not going to cure your problem.
Especially if your check bounces.
Especially because you asked me. That was your first mistake. But that's not going to solve your problems. Your real problem is that you're spending $5,000 a month and you're only making $3,000. It doesn't matter how much the Eurozone pledges to Spain. Their economy is in shambles, and setting the bank straight is not going to put their people back to work. It's not going to increase their GDP, and we're going to be at the same spot in a year or so, probably 6 months. I mean, if we're going to be honest about the whole thing, it's just kicking the can down the road, which is all these guys want to do. I really think they just want the euro to fall apart after they're dead. They can
so they
kick
don't
down
get
the road
so they
far
don't get
enough.
lynched.
Yeah, exactly. Their kids will get lynched.
Well, essentially, I think the only reason the whole international financial system doesn't fall apart is because there are millions of hands holding it up that believe in it.
Because we're all scared if it falls apart, what's going to happen?
It's like a false religion that they can't stand to see that it isn't true.
Right. I mean, and let's say you've got $10,000 in the bank, right, in dollars. You don't want to see those $10,000 become worth zero. And granted, your $10,000 is only $10,000. You got Mitt Romney out there whose family trust has $100 million in it. $100 million, I think, is the figure I saw.
The figure to which they admit.
To which they admit, right? That's the findable money. Obviously, he has a lot more to lose. Face it, if the dollar collapsed and went to zero, he's lost $100 million. You just lost 10,000, right? But here's the thing: that doesn't mean you want to lose 10,000. So everybody has an interest in keeping the system up, even if you've only collected $200 your whole life. You still don't want it to be worth nothing.
Right.
And you're right. That's why everybody's holding it up, because nobody knows what to do if it falls.
Everybody wants to believe.
Yeah.
But
what's the alternative?
But all we have to do is look at Argentina.
Right.
And I just got word today, one of my friends who's here is from Argentina, and he was on the phone today back home to Buenos Aires. And, of course, I know there are people who promote Argentina as the perfect place to live in the world. And
I've heard that. I've heard that.
Yeah. And the Argentine peso has lost 25% of its value against the dollar in the last week. On the street, just on the street, it's gone from 4 to 5.
It's because Madam President is trying to restrict the departure of funds.
Well,
right?
she does. And now, to leave the country, you have to tell them why you're leaving the country. To take any money, you have to account for how you're going to spend it.
So you have to fill out forms and tell them why you need the money out of the country.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's become...
And are banks taking Argentinian pesos? If they go to Uruguay, can they exchange their money?
No, because it's no longer a fully convertible currency.
So it's kind of like the ruble was back in the 80s.
Yep, exactly. Very good. And unfortunately, Mike, we've already covered the first segment and got a couple of things in. Now we have to break for a word from our sponsors. But we will be right back. This is David Finzer with Mike Gard for Truth and Lies Radio, talking about economics and those sorts of things on the Overseas Radio Network. Don't go away. We'll be back in 3.5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. Before we go on to the next topic, I got an email in from one of my dedicated listeners, Ray, who wrote, Dave, there are two types of people. The two types of people are now the screwers and the screwees. They continue to take our rights away. They bitch about the way kids act nowadays, but they have taken away the rights of the parents away, so what do they expect? If you as the parent correct your child, you could be charged with child abuse. I don't think the American people have given up. I don't think we know how to fight it without going to jail. The government pretty much does what it wants. If we complain how it violates our constitutional rights, then they will eventually just amend the Constitution to suit their needs. Well, I would sort of agree with that, Ray, except that I remember something that everyone was sure was going to pass, which was the Equal Rights Amendment, which some of us used to call the Unisex Amendment. And they tried like hell to pass that. And I'm proud to say it was my state, the sovereign state of Florida, which finally killed it. They were one state short of passing that constitutional amendment. In fact, the funny thing was I was debating some feminazi and about the ERA at the time the legislature killed it. So that I won that debate pretty easily. You still can change, but you have to rise above party. You have to vote principle. You have to go and serve on juries. You have to go to caucuses if there are caucuses. You know, in most states, the Republican and Democrat parties have a county committee with two people, a committeeman and a committeewoman from each precinct, you know how small precincts are, most of the precincts are empty. So you can get on the party committee. I've been on the party committee. I mean, if they'll let me my nephew's been on the party committee. If they'll let Mike's been on the party committee.
I was precinct chairman.
Yeah.
I was the only guy who showed up.
Yeah. So, the point is there are ways to fight back politically, and they can't just amend the Constitution. That's the point. If they could amend the Constitution that easily, they would. But they can't. And that's why they go around.
Well, I think what he meant by amend, with like almost quotation marks on that, is that they'll just interpret it however they want to interpret it to make sure that,
Right. Okay.
Right.
But then there's still another example. And this goes back to my Washington days. A story. It's the day I really left dealing with the new right. There was a debate on school prayer. Now, of course, I don't believe in public schools, so I don't really care very much about prayer in schools. I've always said as long as there are exams, there'll be prayer in schools.
Absolutely.
But there was a debate, and the big shots of the so-called new right were there, and I was somehow invited to the meeting. And they were trying to decide whether to back the constitutional amendment for school prayer or Orrin Hatch's bill to simply withdraw the appellate jurisdiction of the federal courts from that issue. And Article 3 of the Constitution gives Congress the right to withdraw appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and of any other courts, except for the jurisdictions that are specifically granted, which are very few, in the Constitution. So Congress can stop the courts a lot more than it does, and there isn't. There's also still what someone once called the High Court of the Nation, which is when the Supreme Court acts unconstitutionally, you impeach them. The House of Representatives impeaches them, the Senate convicts them, you throw their ass out of office. But people let it be nibbled away.
Right.
And that's the problem. It's this incrementalism, and they didn't stop. I mean, I always use as a great example because it's so bland, but it's a perfect example, the Air Force. The Article 1 of the Constitution specifically establishes an Army and a Navy. Now, I don't care if there's an Air Force as a separate branch. Doesn't make any difference to me. But if it was such a great idea and so easy, why didn't Congress just pass a constitutional amendment and the states ratify it? I think it probably would have been ratified.
Right, but going back, usually it comes down to politics. In that case, I'm not sure why they just went ahead with the Air Force and didn't get the Constitution amended. It seems like that, like I said, it's bland. It could have been a feel-good thing if you think about it. Back in the 50s, they were pushing technology, right? They were, America was up and coming. I mean, the space program was just around the corner. Jets were the new thing. Everybody was on board with this, right? There was an arms race with the Soviets. So it seemed like a perfect time to get an amendment passed. It seemed like they were just reticent to pass constitutional amendments, though, for whatever reason. But back to your example about the school prayer and what happened with the Orrin Hatch amendment, and they didn't take away the appellate jurisdiction, correct?
Right, which they probably had votes to do with Ronald Reagan in the White House.
Right, and the reason for that was
because they were afraid they wouldn't be able to raise money on the issue anymore if they won.
Right, exactly. So they need to keep these political footballs in play so they can play to their electorate. And the person I blame most for this in recent politics, although I think that predates him. Bill Clinton did that so much. In '92 when he ran, it was the economy, stupid, right? In '96, though, it wasn't. It was all the little things. And the Republicans do this too. Instead of talking about the elephant in the room, they talk about these little side issues. Like now we're talking about gay marriage. Are you kidding me? Who cares? The world economy is falling apart, and they want to parse contraception. I think was a big deal a couple of months ago in the Republican primary. Contraception? Are you kidding? That's from the 50s and 60s. The pill's been around for 50 years. We're talking, that's not germane to anybody's life right now. No, this is all a side issue to take your mind, take your eyes off of what's important. It's debating the color of the curtains on the Titanic an hour after you hit the iceberg.
Well, I think the same thing about conspiracy theories. So many of the conspiracy theories, like the 9/11 theories, I don't know, and I don't think we'll ever know until America becomes a free nation again, really what happened. But that doesn't matter. Yeah. Let's fight the battles that are in front of us.
Thing, 50 years from now will tell us what really happened on 9/11.
Well, sure. I mean, just like accidentally the British declassified the thing that showed that the Soviet agents of influence in the British Foreign Office sold out the royal government of Yugoslavia in favor of the communists.
Right, and Alger Hiss and all that. And
correct.
Then, the Rosenbergs were certainly guilty. I mean, there's all kinds of, and Joe McCarthy was mostly right.
Yeah, he was not a good man.
No,
he was a schmuck.
He was a scumbag politician.
Right.
But they all are.
And the funny thing is, I mean, yeah, that's what I found out. I mean, when I went to Washington, I thought everybody on our side was on the side of the angels, and everybody on the other side.
It's because you watched Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and really believed the crap.
Oh, that's right. Exactly. And then as I got to know them, I had more trouble and had more rotten things done to my organization, Conservative Action Foundation, by the right than ever by the left, because I wouldn't play ball with their stupidity, and I wanted to stand up for principle.
Right. It's like getting a job at a factory and doing your best, working as hard as you want, and then after your first week of work, the foreman or somebody in the union comes up to you and says, "Hey, buddy, you got to slow down. You're working too hard."
Yep.
Right? And that's what was happening with you in Washington. It's we don't really want to win all these battles.
Because then there's no reason. Then we're not going to get a paycheck because we're not going to be running these political organizations.
Exactly. It's just like you don't want to tell Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton that 99% of the race problems in America have already been solved. We don't need you anymore. Right?
Exactly.
Because they need their position. They need their job.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, I thought that's what a filibuster was. And now they can filibuster just by saying this bill is filibustered, and they go on doing other business. I thought the whole point was you stop the business of Congress because there's a filibuster going on, and as long as the guy can speak, he has the floor.
Well, Harry Reid changed a bunch of those rules.
That's utter crap.
Okay. Yeah, well, we managed to take up that whole segment without even going on to really a new topic, but that's okay because these are important things to talk about. Remember what Thomas Jefferson said, if I could only go to heaven with a political party, I would not go at all. But now we have to break for the news at the bottom of the hour and a word from our sponsors. We'll be right back. Don't go away. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network.